This is Murthy Ammanamamchi. I am the head of client and content technology in our global markets division at Credit Suisse. In addition to that one, I head the Center for Innovation, which we call Tech Enclave in India. As part of our Tech Enclave, like we have a major blockchain development center, and the Credit Suisse, as a major financial institution globally, we are part of the R3 consortium, which is a consortium of all the investment banks interested in exploring blockchain as a technology. And currently, though we experimented with many technologies, currently like many major projects are going on. One of them is called Project Ubin. Like we have done in 2 phases, and this is in partnership with the Monetary Authority of Singapore. And in addition to that one, like we have another project in pipeline, like which is about intra-entity money transfers. And the third project we are still we are in the process of exploring is this one, like a blockchain-based rewards mechanism. Okay. So I would like to hand over my colleague, Mr. Bhushan Kowshik, who is our chief architect, would present the projects we are doing. But I encourage, request all of you to post questions like through our webinar chat windows, etc. Okay. Over to you, Bhushan.
Thank you so much, Murthy. I am really excited to be here. I see only 25 of you have joined so far, but I guess that number is going to increase as in the next few minutes. And the reason for my excitement is I am part of a very innovative industry-wide project that's been run in Singapore under the aegis of the Association of Banks in Singapore, and pretty much driven centrally by the regulatory body in Singapore, which is called as the Monetary Authority of Singapore, MAS in short. What this project aims to do is to create a parallel marketplace for the financial services industry to enable trading of any kind of asset classes, name it in terms of cash, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, derivatives, and so on and so forth over a certain period of time. And I'm proud to be part of this industry-wide initiative. In fact, I'm a solution architect for one of the very key front-loading initiatives on this project. As Murthy mentioned, it's called as Project Ubin. And I also play the role of a product owner of one of those work streams. And I'm also a senior stakeholder in the entire project. So it really is a pleasure to be here and talking to you about not only blockchain in general, but my personal point of view of what blockchain technology is all about, how the financial services industry is trying to deal with this new, innovative, just off the blocks kid compared to a few hundred years of the existing financial services industry, and it really is an exciting future that I foresee, which is going to be quite disruptive. It's quite disruptive even as we speak, but I think the level of disruption is going to just accelerate very rapidly over the next few years. And in fact, if I had a crystal ball, I would say, I would pretty much predict that it's going to change the very fundamentals of how we transact in terms of money and any other assets that we value in terms of money over the next few years. So just to introduce myself, my name is Bhushan Kowshik. I'm the chief architect for a major division within Credit Suisse. I deal primarily in the APAC markets, and whilst I do that as part of my day job, I also am a great enthusiast for fintech. And as part of fintech, I chose blockchain technology as to be the one of the first areas that I would really like to focus on and educate people not only within Credit Suisse but also in the general financial services industry, not just in Singapore but also in the rest of the region. I am very actively involved in the Singapore fintech happenings, but through sessions like this, which are trying to bring what's happening in Singapore to the rest of the region. I also conduct some sessions globally. I think it's my real privilege to talk to all of you guys. I have about 25 years of technology experience, out of which about 15 years I have spent in Credit Suisse, dealing with both client side and market side business cases across a number of departments in Credit Suisse. And, as I said, 15 years in Credit Suisse, and I've been associated with the fintech industry for the last couple of years. My real passion for this at this point in time is blockchain technologies, but I am, as I am dealing with a number of blockchain initiatives and projects within the region, I'm also going to kick off a number of initiatives in the artificial intelligence and machine learning world very, very soon. In fact, one of those projects is supposed to be kicking off next week. So far, so good in terms of introductions. What I wanted to really cover today is a couple of topics. And it's really my point of view, but it's something that I have been discussing with a number of people in the industry inside Credit Suisse and outside. And they always like to go back to the history of what blockchain is all about. So I would like to start with what is cryptocurrencies. I'm sure all of you would have heard about it. And each one of you might have a different perspective about it. So I thought I should bring a little bit of my own perspective in terms of what cryptocurrencies are and why should you care about it. So if you look at cryptocurrencies, and one of my colleagues prepared this deck, I think 3 weeks back, and I'll tell you why I mentioned 3 weeks back period very, very soon. So 3 weeks back, the market cap of Bitcoin, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with Bitcoin as a cryptocurrency, was 57 billion. If you look up the Bitcoin market cap 3 weeks later, which is today, I'm sure that number is a lot higher than 57 billion. Similarly, there's another very famous blockchain technology called Ethereum, and then they have floated a cryptocurrency called Ether, and its market cap was 26 billion 3 weeks back. I don't know what it is now, but I'm sure it is more than what it was. In addition to that, there have been a number of venture capitalists and other firms who are heavily investing in blockchain technology, pumping in money into fintech startups, pumping in money into companies who are migrating from what they are doing into adopting fintech, especially in the blockchain technology space. If you see open job postings, and I'm quoting something from financial technology, ft.com, there are more than 1,000 job openings at any given point in time. In addition to that, if you look at the number of daily transactions, again, 3 weeks back, it was estimated to be about 280K. I'm sure that number has gone up again. So the message I'm trying to give you guys is cryptocurrencies have been there since Bitcoin was launched in 2009. It's 2017. It's probably 8 years later, but it's really a point in time where they have started making a big impact to the way the financial services industry works and behaves, and you interact with it. So let's take a quick look at what are cryptocurrencies, right? Cryptocurrency essentially is nothing but a digital token that exists on a public blockchain. And somebody was very right in saying there are more than 1,000 cryptocurrencies which have been launched since Bitcoin was launched in 2008, not 2009, as I said earlier. Yeah. The total market cap of all these cryptocurrencies exceeds $100 billion US dollars. That's not a small number. What are the key features of cryptocurrencies? So all of these are basically issued on a system where there is no central authority. Now, if you all understand the primary way the financial services industry works across the world, right? There are what are called as central banks, and the primary job of the central bank is to issue what is called as a fiat currency into that particular market. So for example, in Singapore, the central bank is the monetary authority of Singapore, the one I mentioned earlier, and one of its primary jobs is to issue Singapore dollars into the market. So they are the only legal issuers of the Singapore dollar into the entire global market. Likewise, the Bank of Canada, which is a central bank in Canada, is the only legal issuer of Canadian dollars, and so on and so forth across a number of other countries in the world. What does this mean from a Bitcoin perspective? It means that there isn't a central authority which has issued these Bitcoins into the so-called global public blockchain, which today has more than estimated 6 million users who are trading in this cryptocurrency called Bitcoin and Bitcoin tokens, where there isn't a single central trusted authority who has issued those coins. And look at the way the Bitcoin price has moved over the number of years since it was issued in 2008. I think it was less than a few cents, or probably in the less than 10 cents. And today, the same Bitcoin token, a single Bitcoin token, is valued more than 4,000 US dollars. And who has been driving the price of this Bitcoin token? It's been people like you and me who have been buying and selling Bitcoins across these number of years for whatever reason and purpose, even though it is not so freely tradable with any of the existing fiat currencies in the world or any other products that we can buy normally in our day-to-day lives. In spite of all these constraints, the value of Bitcoin has been exponentially increasing over this period of time. The other key features of cryptocurrencies is that they're all hosted on what is called as a shared ledger, which means the entire transaction history since when those original Bitcoins or any other cryptocurrencies were issued onto their own respective ledgers, where that the entire history is maintained on that shared ledger. So there's a shared ledger for Bitcoin, there's a shared ledger for Ether, and there's a shared ledger for each of those 1,000 cryptocurrencies. Some of these ledgers don't even talk to each other. But actually, in all reality, none of them talk to each other except through certain specific entities called as exchanges. And we'll talk about what those exchanges are a little bit later. Another key feature is that these tokens are represented in terms of digital signature, and different blockchain cryptocurrencies have adopted different types of digital signatures and different types of hash functions to to uniquely identify each token that they have issued into into the marketplace. The unique identification of each token helps in terms of trying to prevent issues like double spending. And what I mean by double spending is, for example, if you have a 100-rupee note, each of those notes has a unique serial number on it, right? So that unique serial number says that, if at a point in time I own that 100 rupees note and I transfer it to one of you, then I've uniquely transferred it to one of you, and I cannot use the same serial number to transfer it to somebody else. So that essentially is what double spending is all about. So where all can you go and do these transfers of digital tokens or cryptocurrency tokens? These are typically done over marketplaces called as exchanges. And if you look at it, in today's world, there are more than 150 exchanges which are operating across the world. I think another key feature is the fact that this is open and public. That means anybody can go and enter and exit this network. I do see an interesting question in terms of, are Bitcoins really legal in India? I have literally no idea about that. If I were to look at it from Singapore, because I'm based in Singapore, would I call as Bitcoins legal in Singapore? Yes, I'm a proud owner of a few Bitcoins. And I did buy them when they were not so expensive as they were today. But in terms of the legal framework, it's an open question. The reason being, none of the regulators have actually come and said that Bitcoins or any of the other cryptocurrencies are illegal. All they are coming out and saying is there are people who are trading in cryptocurrencies, or the newest avatar of cryptocurrencies called as initial coin offerings or ICOs. It's literally a buyer beware scenario. That means if you are planning to buy cryptocurrencies or any of the ICO coins or tokens, you have to ensure that you are doing that with your eyes and ears open, and you have ticked all the boxes in terms of, yes, if tomorrow whatever I hold in terms of Bitcoins or Ethers or any of the ICOs, the value goes down to zero, I'm not really impacted. So let's again take a look at a little bit of Bitcoin, right? So what is the underlying asset that Bitcoin is supported by? There really isn't any. So let me give you a counter example. So for example, if you were to buy IBM stock or IBM shares, there is a fundamental underlying value to the stock that you're buying, because IBM is a big company. It hosts a number of products. It has a number of customers who buy those products. And hence, you would say, yes, I want to own a piece of IBM because I see some value in owning that. Would I do that same thing for Bitcoin? I would think twice, right? Because Bitcoin really doesn't have an underlying asset class or an underlying transaction that is of value. So what is driving the value of Bitcoin from a few cents in 2008 to about $4,000 today? It is pretty much speculative and investment. Yes, and there are some cases where in the US, for example, you can actually purchase some other products or assets by spending Bitcoins. And in fact, as we speak, a number of other countries have started announcing that they are no longer going to prevent that happening. So you could actually use Bitcoins to purchase regular products that you would do using your normal mode of purchase using your country's fiat currencies. And yes, there is a third use case in terms of payments and transfers. So once you own some Bitcoins and you want to transfer not Bitcoins, but let's say Indian rupees to somebody in Singapore like me, and I would be very, very happy if you can do that and increase my bank account. But you know, instead of you might find it very difficult to transfer Indian rupees, but you could potentially do that with equivalent number of Bitcoin. So let's say you want to transfer 1 million Indian rupees to me. You don't really need to do that. You need to go and buy you know, a handful of Bitcoins and then put it into your wallet and then transfer that from your wallet to mine. And it's done. And there are no questions asked. So it's pretty much that easy. Sorry, I'm just going to take a little pause because I'm having a little bit of difficulty in trying to read the questions that have that are being posed. There's some bit of an issue in terms of the window in which the questions are visible. I do see a number of questions which I think I should be answering, but I am unfortunately able to read them in the small window that's available to me. I will try and answer all the questions that are coming up on the board at a later point in time. That's my promise. So let's take a look at what are the top 10 cryptocurrencies by market cap. Obviously, the first one is Bitcoin. The second one is Ether. It's wrongly called as Ethereum on this slide, but the actual cryptocurrency is called as Ether. The reason it's called as Ethereum is because the underlying platform on which these Ethers are issued is on a technology called Ethereum. And unlike Bitcoin, Ethereum is slightly different. The major difference is that Ethereum is a platform which you can use to not only issue Ether, but any other types of assets into a distributed or a blockchain ledger. And hence it has some level of fundamental in terms of inherent value associated with the value of the Ether. The reason being, there are a lot of companies who are investing in the platform saying, oh, we want to create unique products and for our customers, or we want to create a unique experience for our customer which they have never had before. And we will use this platform called Ethereum to develop that new type of product or new type of customer experience. And hence, I will invest in this product called as I will invest in this cryptocurrency which is issued on this platform, Ethereum, called as Ether. The next one is Ripple. It's not really based on an underlying blockchain technology, but it's used as a kind of a bridge between different currency pairs, regular currency pairs, and also other cryptocurrencies. It's an interesting concept. I would encourage all of you to read through what Ripple is about. Just very recently, a new cryptocurrency was created as a fork from the original Bitcoin, and it's called as Bitcoin Cash. So what is this fork about? Let me take a minute or so to talk about. So when Bitcoins were originally issued, there were only 21 million Bitcoins issued, and the promise was that there will never be more than 21 million Bitcoins ever issued into this public blockchain. What has happened since then is, because of the way the blockchain platform was created for Bitcoin and the way it is coded and behaves in this global public network, it was soon realized that there are limitations in terms of how many transactions per second that it can that the platform can process. And in order to overcome that transaction limit, they actually changed the underlying code and destroyed a few of those originally issued Bitcoins and created a new type of cryptocurrency called Bitcoin Cash, which is theoretically on a faster and better platform compared to the old Bitcoin. So there is this new cryptocurrency called Bitcoin Cash, and then as I mentioned earlier, there are more than 1,000 cryptocurrencies that exist in the world today. I will take a pause there to answer some of the questions so far because I think it's relevant. Let me just, oh my goodness, there are so many questions. Okay, so Nitin Ahuja asked, are Bitcoins legal in India? I thought I explained that. Nilesh Bansal has asked, is there something similar to Bitcoin that exists? And I can't read the question after that, unfortunately. This is a very interesting question. Which is the best platform to develop blockchain POCs, Ethereum or Hyperledger Fabric? And this question has been asked by Akhil Mishri. I will award you 0.00001 Bitcoin for asking this fantastic question. I talked about that I've been working on this project called Ubin, which has been launched in Singapore and attempting to create a parallel marketplace on a distributed ledger or blockchain technologies. Interestingly, what we are doing is we are this industry consortium that we have built in Singapore is working on 3 different blockchain platforms. The first one is Ethereum, or really an offshoot of Ethereum called Quorum. The second one is IBM's Hyperledger Fabric, and the third one is a platform which has been which is called as CORDA and has been created under the by a company called R3, which is nothing but running a consortium of different global banks who have got together and said, we need to create a blockchain system which is suitable for the financial services industry. And I'll talk about why some of the blockchain systems that exist in the world may or may not be suitable for addressing the problems of the financial services industry a little bit later. Another question was, if no regulations, then who's responsible for if sometime it crashes? Absolutely brilliant question. In a system like Bitcoin or Ethereum, there really isn't a central counterparty who's responsible. So if, for example, an exchange is hacked, which actually happened with Bitcoin, I think sometime back, please read up Mount Gox. That's a very famous word in the Bitcoin world. And you will get tons of information in terms of, how exchange in the Bitcoin ecosystem was hacked, all the money that people were holding on that exchange in their wallets was lost and never ever recovered. How many successful implementations of blockchain have been there with respect to supply chain? Excellent question from Akhil Mishri again, but I won't award you any more Bitcoins because I've done so once earlier. I really am not an expert to answer that because I don't think there ever is an expert in this world to answer that. I think I've been associated with with blockchain technologies for the last year and a half, and I'm already a veteran, considered a veteran in that respect. But as a veteran, I have only dealt with 4 blockchain projects till now. How many are happening in this world in a specific business context? I absolutely have no idea. I don't think anybody in this world has an absolute idea to answer that question. How is Bitcoin actually deriving value? As I mentioned earlier, there really isn't an underlying value. It's all speculation. I will try and skip a few questions because there are too many. This is an interesting question. How can I make a blockchain? By Pratush Prasun. I can make a blockchain on my own laptop. I have done so, and in fact, I can't show you the demo because I'm using my Credit Suisse machine right now to show you the presentation. But on my personal laptop, I have a number of projects that I have created using underlying blockchain technologies, and yes, you can do that. But if you want to do a public blockchain, for example, like Bitcoin, you are more than welcome to do that, as long as people trust whatever you have created, and people want to put in their hard and assets onto, like Indian rupees or any other fiat currencies to buy whatever you have created. Are Bitcoins legal in every country? Yes and no. Depends on what those regulations are at any given point in time. So let me switch back to the presentation. What are the typical parts of the ecosystem? We talked about exchanges. We talked about Mt. Gox, which was very recently hacked, and people lost the Bitcoins that they were trading on that exchange at that point in time. There is a concept called wallets, where you actually store the tokens or the the cryptocurrencies that you own. They are supposed to be secure because you can only access your wallet using a private key, whereas when you transfer your money from your wallet to somebody else's wallet, you use your public key to acknowledge the transfer, whereas you kind of certify that you are doing the transfer using your private key. Obviously, there are contracts like a payment contract, which allows you to transfer the money or to buy or to exchange cryptocurrencies with other products in the market. And there's a very interesting concept called as miners. So what is miners? It's a little bit of an involved discussion, but at a very high level, what miners do is essentially say, in this decentralized network where there is no central counterparty which intervenes in between two people exchanging a particular asset, the miners are the one who come and say, yes, I have certified that that exchange is valid. Number one, I have certified on the basis that the originator of the exchange has the assets that he or she says they want to exchange, and at the end of the exchange, the beneficiary of the exchange has receives those same amount of assets. So it's pretty much what the miners do. And in terms of blockchain technologies or distributed ledger technologies, that mechanism is called as consensus. We did talk about specifically cryptocurrencies which exist today. There are a number of issues and risks that that one has to take into account. Number one, things like Bitcoin can be used for illegal activities. The reason being, the Bitcoin network is a public permissionless network. That means you and I can, or anybody else in this world has an equal right to open an account on the Bitcoin, in the Bitcoin ecosystem through owning a wallet and then purchasing Bitcoins or any other cryptocurrencies and storing it in their wallet. The way you and I or any other person are identified in this ecosystem is through a unique identifier which is unreadable by people and cannot be tied back to your physical or any other identity that you are associated with, which means these cryptocurrencies can typically be used for nefarious activities like money laundering, like gambling, drugs, ransom payments, terrorist activities, and so on and so forth. That is obviously a downside of the of dealing with cryptocurrencies, and maybe it is one of the reasons why things like the value of Bitcoin has gone up over a period of time, and so for other cryptocurrencies. Having said that, a number of regulators across the world have woken up to the fact that yes, these cryptocurrencies are reality. We have to deal with them, and what they are insisting now is that the exchanges which allow the transfer of cryptocurrencies from one party to another, they do the sufficient amount of KYC or know your customer kind of activities so that they can minimize these kind of illegal activities. We talked about Mt. Gox. That is a very good example of instability of the ecosystem. That probably has been the largest hack that's happened in the cryptocurrency world. And obviously, once the hack is committed, the tokens are stolen, there is no legal protection. That means once you lose those tokens, you're done. The other issue to deal with in terms of the way many of the cryptocurrency platforms work is this concept of miners. So, or the underlying consensus mechanism that they use. So typically in a Bitcoin world, if you look at it, at this point in time, there are not more than 5 entities globally who certify the validity of all the transactions on that network. And theoretically, if somebody were to gain more than 50% of the mining power of that network, they could potentially either rewrite the entire blockchain on that network, or they could potentially introduce elements that are fraudulent into that network. So yes, there are issues like centralization of miners. There are issues like centralization of the exchanges. There are issues like centralization of those wallet providers to be dealt with in many of the cryptocurrency ecosystems that exist. And I also talked about scalability in terms of before the 1st of August of this year, Bitcoin took about 10 minutes to confirm a transaction of block size of one megabyte, which kind of translates into 7 transactions per second, compared to a real world normal currency transfer of about 2,000 transactions per second. So it's very, very limited. To overcome these limitations, that's the reason Bitcoin got split into Bitcoin Cash. It has used some clever technologies to overcome that 7 transactions per second limit, and in fact increase the block size from 1 MB to 8 MB. That means you could potentially do 8 times what you could do earlier. But again, if you see that it's still limited in terms of real world use cases. So far, I think I've talked enough about cryptocurrencies. What I thought I would like to cover next is what is the fundamental reason why these blockchain technologies have come and kind of started pervading our world, right? The fundamental reason for that is trust, or actually lack of it. I would like to take you through a couple of examples to explain what the trust or lack of trust means. And I would like to do it from a financial services industry perspective because that's the one that I'm most comfortable with. So let's say there is a central bank in a particular economy like Singapore, and the central bank is MAS. It's the only legal issuer of Singapore dollars into the entire world. So if you want to convert your Indian rupees into Sing dollars, you have to remember that that Sing dollar was originally issued by the MAS in Singapore. So MAS, for example, Credit Suisse goes to MAS and says, I want to borrow $100 from you in lieu of some other asset that I will give to you. And MAS says, yes, I'm happy to give you $100. The fundamental problem of trust starts with the fact that, why does Bank A trust that MAS is the legal issuer? It does that because it's been in practice for so many years. And number one, it does that because there is legally bound restrictions on MAS being the legal authority to issue Sing dollars, and MAS can actually freely create as many Sing dollars as it wants to. So let's say MAS has started with a original amount of 100 represented by these 4 tokens on the slide, and Bank A wants to borrow 50 amounts of tokens represented by on the right hand side of the slide by these 2 sets of coins. So what that means is the issuer starting with 100 will go down to 50 when it executes the transfer, and 50 once it is transferred to Bank A is under the ownership of Bank A and no longer under the ownership of the issuer. So there are 2 fundamental problems here. Number one, as I said, why would Bank A trust MAS as the issuer to issue $50 to it? And number 2, how once Bank A gets that $50, will it prove to the rest of the world that now it is the legal owner of the $50? It's a difficult problem to deal with, right? The second problem is about asset ownership and transfer. So let's start with the original assumption that now Bank A had $50 and it wants to transfer that $50 to Bank B for whatever underlying reason. So again, let's talk about how does Bank B trust Bank A that, yeah, Bank A has $50 to give it to Bank B. And secondly, again, Bank B has to deal with a subsequent problem once it gets the transfer from Bank A. How does it prove to the rest of the world that now it is the legal owner of that $50? So this is the underlying fundamental problem that blockchain technologies have come into this world and started answering. How do they do that? It is essentially through a mechanism called decentralized trust. And the simple flow that I've created here kind of explains how that works, right? So please pay very minute attention to what I'm saying. So let's start with a central bank issuer who has created $100 from nothing because it has got the right to do that, and it wants to transfer that $50 from its original $100 to Bank A. What it does is it does that through what is termed as a contract, and that contract is a legally binding contract, and that actually happens in today's world, right? So there is an issuance contract which is executed by the issuer to issue $50 to Bank A. That is well and good in today's centralized world where there is a central bank who is issuing that currency to Bank A. But what happens in a decentralized world, like a Bitcoin world, is there is this group called as miners or notary who actually say, yes, I have seen that the issuer starts with original balance of 100, out of which it has transferred 50 to Bank A, and I authorize this transaction. That is the concept of the notary or the miners from a Bitcoin world or a cryptocurrency world, or what is also called as a consensus mechanism in blockchain technology. Let's also look at the second problem of now Bank A owns the $50, which it wants to transfer to Bank B. So how does it do that? It does that through what is called as a transfer contract. And in fact, that is a contract which exists in the current scheme of things, but also in a blockchain-enabled world, it will be done through a specific contract called a transfer contract. What a transfer contract would do is say, given that it's a piece of code and it can see that Bank A owns the $50 to begin with, it will consume the $50 from bank A and create two pieces of output. One, first piece of output is bank A, you don't any longer own the $50. You only own 0 now. And bank B, you are the new owner of the $50. And this entire contract is validated by a similar notary that we talked about. So essentially, this is what blockchain technology does in the underlying through various different pieces of code, if I were to call it that way. And I see again that there are so many questions being asked. I have no idea how I'm going to answer all of those. So let's quickly move ahead to see what have we learned through the previous 3 slides of examples that I've given. Right? What are the key elements of blockchain technologies? So number 1 is the network. And the example that I gave to you is an example where there is a permission network. That means there is a party called as the issuer or the central bank who has been given authority in that permission network with saying that it is the only party who can issue assets or currency into this network. The second key element is called as identity, right? What is the identity? It's all about saying, you know, the party on the left here is a central bank like MAS. So it can uniquely identify that party as your name is MAS and you have a role as a central bank. Whereas the party in the middle is identified by a public identity called Bank A, and the party on the right hand side is identified by a public identity called Bank B. There's a concept called as private identity. So it's only known to self. That means Bank A will only know its own private identity compared to, and nobody else in the world will know about it. Why is private identity important? Because when it issues a transfer contract to Bank B, it has to sign that contract using its private identity so that nobody else can act on its behalf. And there's a special concept called as a confidential identity. I will touch base upon confidential identity a little bit later, but a key difference is between a blockchain-enabled network like Bitcoin versus a permission network. In a blockchain-enabled network, everybody's identity is anonymous. That means that unique key that identifies participants in that network, you cannot tie it back with a physical person or entity. Whereas in a permission network, like the example that I gave to you, anonymous identities are actually not encouraged. The third key element is a legal contract, which can be executed as a code. So the examples that I gave to you here are issuance contracts or transfer contracts, but in reality, you can write code to execute any kind of a transaction. There are 2 other key concepts. The fourth one is called as states, right? So if you see the coins which are represented on this slide, they are nothing but the states of the asset holdings of that counterparty. So in the original case, the issuer, as I said, had 100 worth of coins. That means it had 100 states of that particular coin. And the fourth concept is a notary or a consensus mechanism, again, which we saw through the example that it plays a special role in the blockchain network in terms of, verifying and authorizing that a transaction is a valid transaction has taken place. I'll take a little bit of a pause here because I think I've talked about a number of concepts in terms of a public permissionless network like a Bitcoin versus a private permission network like the projects that I'm dealing with in the financial services industry. And when you're if your intent is to use blockchain technologies for any purpose, I think these 5 elements, key elements, have to be weighed against from a philosophical point of view in terms of the design consideration that you think about whilst developing a new product or a new marketplace. And there are essentially trade-offs that you will need to make, decide on in terms of how would you want to utilize those design considerations. So the first one is the network. We talked about permissionless networks like Bitcoin versus a permission network like the ones we are creating in Project Ubin. And the key element there is, would you trust an unknown party who has issued 21 million Bitcoins into a network versus would you trust a central bank like MAS who's issuing Singapore dollars into the economy. The second key element we talked about was identity. We talked about public, private, confidential in the context of Project Ubin versus anonymous in the context of Bitcoin. And obviously there are pros and cons to that. I think the third important point, which I have not addressed so far, is the point about communication. So in a Bitcoin kind of a world, what really happens is when two parties transfer Bitcoins between each other, the entire that particular transaction gets broadcast to the entire Bitcoin network. Now, in reality, let's take an example of, let's say I want to give 100 rupees to Murthy. Would I let the entire world know that I'm transferring 100 rupees to Murthy? Obviously not, right? It will be a very private transaction between myself and Murthy, and that is what I term as a point-to-point communication. So in the financial services industry, one of the key differences between a Bitcoin kind of a network versus what happens in reality is, or in the majority, is that most of the transactions are really point-to-point, and we don't need to tell the whole world that, yes, I have done the transaction. And that's another design consideration that needs to be done. I would also encourage you to go and learn a little bit about UTXO. I'm not going to talk about UTXO in detail today because it is very involved. But again, I would like to refer to the example of the 100 rupee note I took a while back, saying there is a unique serial number on that 100 rupee note. What that serial number does is it ensures that, once I have transferred the 100 rupees to Murthy, I will no longer hold that another note with that same serial number, which I can transfer to somebody else. That is really the concept of UTXO. And that is the underlying beauty about Bitcoin and the fantastic innovation that Mr. Satoshi Nakamoto brought about to this world. Versus a number of other blockchain technologies which don't use a UTXO kind of state to represent assets, but use an account model. And an account model is nothing but debits and credits. So there are trade-offs that you need to take into considerations when using these different types of technologies. And the last one is consensus. So in a Bitcoin world, we talked about miners whom we really don't, we know that there are X number of miners in that Bitcoin network across the world, but in reality, who are those miners? Would we really say we absolutely trust them? No. We trust them because they have been doing the same job over millions of Bitcoin transactions since inception, but are they really parties that, if they were to go and fool with the Bitcoin world with the Bitcoin network in some way or the other, would we trust them to say, yeah, I did go and do that tomfoolery in the network? I wouldn't. Whereas, if something went wrong with the Singapore economy, I would trust MAS to say, yes, there was some screw up happened and I'm going to take care of correcting that. So the consensus mechanism is also important to consider that, how well known are the consensus providers in the ecosystem and how much would you trust them. I would like to talk about Project Ubin a little bit. I realize we are very close to the end of the presentation, so let me speed up. The example of issuance contract and transfer contract, that's something which we completed in December last year. I think it was published in the papers. Then in terms of continuation of that Project Ubin, what we are creating is called as a decentralized liquidity savings mechanism. And this is where I am really excited, because as I started my presentation saying I'm really excited to talk to you guys, the reason is being this is the first time ever in the world that a decentralized liquidity savings mechanism is being created. And it's being created in Singapore, and I'm one of the key solution architects responsible for that. So what does a liquidity savings mechanism mean? Let's take a look at the example. In this example, we have three banks, Bank A, Bank B, Bank C. Each of the banks starts with $50 worth of initial money in their wallets. And what Bank A wants to do is transfer $50 from itself to Bank B. Similarly, Bank B wants to transfer $50 from itself to Bank C, and Bank C wants to transfer $50 from itself to Bank A. So if there were a central counterparty who had visibility over all these three transactions, what would it come and say? It would say that in reality, no transfer needs to happen, because if you look at it from Bank A's perspective, it has 50 outgoing and 50 incoming. That means Bank A doesn't really need to do anything, right? Similarly, Bank B has 50 outgoing and 50 incoming, and it doesn't need to do anything. And Bank C has 50 outgoing and 50 incoming, and again, it doesn't need to do anything. But in a decentralized blockchain-enabled world, there is no such central counterparty. So how do you actually make this transaction happen without a central counterparty intervening and saying, none of these $50 payments need to happen because they all cancel out each other. This is exactly what we are currently developing in Project Ubin 2A. Hopefully we should be able to demonstrate success to the entire world sometime early October. That's our plan. Thank you so much, and I would like to move to what is the Q&A section. I do realize there are only 3 minutes left, so I have to probably pick and choose a few from the questions which have been asked on the board. What is a good place to start reading about blockchain for beginners? Simple answer, internet. Go to Google and just type blockchain, and whatever you want to learn about blockchain, I think you will get tons of information. I do have a favorite blockchain platform which I actively use to develop use cases. It's called CORDA. You can go and read about it at docs.corda.net. Spelling is CORDA. So that's my personal point of view. I'm not selling CORDA. So, does a private blockchain network have all the benefits of a public one? Somebody asked this question and left, but I'll try to answer it again. There are, as I said, we talked about the design considerations between a public versus a private blockchain. It's really a question of trust, and depending upon what kind of problem you're trying to solve using blockchain technologies, you would have to take that. You would have to answer that design consideration and give that offering to the people who want to use that network. How is the miner paid in Bitcoin ecosystem? The miner is paid using Bitcoin itself. uses of blockchain other than fund transfers or transactions. There are, I would say, thousands, if not millions, of use cases where blockchain technologies can be used. But as I fundamentally explained a little while back, the core problem that blockchain technologies really addressed is a lack of trust between two counterparties who want to do some kind of a value exchange between each other. And the blockchain technologies come in and help to establish that a level of trust where it didn't exist before. I think we're pretty much at the end of the presentation. Thank you all for joining. I hope I've covered a number of key questions you had in mind and you wanted to be addressed as part of this presentation. If not, I'm sure you'll be able to look me up on LinkedIn. As I said, my name is Bhushan Kowshik, and I guess you might have seen my bio on the HackerEarth. If not, do reach out to HackerEarth for further details, but please feel to reach out to me. I will try my level best to answer your personal queries. With that, thank you all so much. Thanks for attending. And I will be signing off very soon.